So if you're ready to take your business online and you know that you need to have a website domain name, you probably already written down a couple of names that you want to use and you tried them out and you found out that they were already taken. Hi everyone, David Jackson here. And in this video, I am going to help you choose a domain name that is easy for people to remember, that gives you credibility, and is good enough so that you don't have to change it in the future. So here are some of the things you need to consider when choosing a domain name. You need to make sure that it is easy to remember, that it is easy to say, and that it is easy to spell. So what I like to do is test out a domain name by thinking of it as if it were broadcast on the radio, would somebody be able to hear it for the first time and hear it only that one time and then be able to remember it long enough for them to get home and type it into their browser and still reach my website. And having something that is easy for people to say would help with word of mouth marketing. So you can use something like your company's brand name, or if you have a personal brand, then it can be your own name. But you want to make sure that it's easy for people to spell. Spelling is key. I remember this one time a guy had a website that had the word hobbyist in it. I think it was like a car hobbyist or something like that. And hobbyist isn't exactly an easy word to spell. You can kind of think, okay, does it have a Y in it or does it not have a Y in it? Does it end in EST or does it end in IST? Or does the Y become an I and then it's a ST? So people have to like go back to grammar school and think about like all the different rules of spelling this word. And it can just get confusing and they would wind up not going to the website or can't find the website because they're spelling that word wrong. You also want to use the .com domain name. If you are in the US or your audience is in the US, then using a .com domain name is the way to go because it has been ingrained in our mind to just kind of always have the domain name and then put .com at the end. The only exception to this rule would be is if you're international and your customer base is also international. So if you're in the UK, then the .com equivalent in the UK is the co.uk, and that's what you would want to use. And speaking of .com, this kind of leads into the things that you want to avoid when choosing a domain name. As I mentioned, you want to have .com. So using something other than .com is a big mistake. You could wind up doing something like joesplumbing.net, but then anytime that somebody hears your domain name, they'll remember the Joe's Plumbing part, but then when they type it into their browser, they'll put .com and they'll wind up going to some other plumbing website. So you want to make sure to avoid the things like .net or any of the other brand new extensions that have come out over the years. The only exceptions that I would say is if you are a non-for-profit, then you could probably use the .org and it would still fit, as some people think that nonprofits have that .org domain name. Another exception would be things like using the .ai or the .io. Those are seeming to start catching on, especially the .ai, now that AI is a really big thing. So if you have an AI company, then you can use .ai, or if you are some type of software provider doing the software as a service, then you might be able to use the .io and it would still fit. Now, long term, there's really no way of knowing how that's going to go. And you still have the possibility of somebody hearing your domain name, but then just putting .com on the end of it. So what I would suggest you would do is still get the .com version if you can, and then just redirect it to the .ai or the .io. Another thing you want to avoid using is dashes and hyphens in between the words. This just makes it harder to type. So having something like Joe's plumbing in Chicago. Just imagine having to say that out loud when you're telling somebody the domain name of your website. And then not only that, they'll remember Joe's Plumbing in Chicago. And when they get home, they'll just put in Joe's Plumbing in Chicago and they'll forget the dashes. Another reason to avoid dashes in your domain name is your domain name is also going to be part of your email address. So if it's support at Joe's Plumbing in Chicago, that Joe's Plumbing in Chicago is going to have dashes in between there. And it's just going to look unprofessional. If somebody receives an email from that domain name, they are going to think that it's probably spam because people aren't used to seeing dashes in the domain name of an email. And another thing that can make domain names confusing is substituting numbers for words. So using the number 2 for TO or using the number 4 for FOR. I know it can seem clever and it can help you in coming up with a domain name that still sounds the way that you want it to sound. But again, if somebody were to hear it, they are going to use the FOR for, and they're not going to think of using the number 4 when they are typing in your domain name. And speaking of being clever, you want to make sure not to use any clever spellings in your domain name. So like, let's say you have a domain name that has painters in it. Dropping the last E in painters so that it's just TRS, that's just going to cause confusion and people are not going to be able to find your website, or another website will be getting the traffic that you should be getting because they're just going to spell painters the way it's supposed to be spelled, and they're not going to remember how you cleverly spelled it in your domain name. Now, when it comes to spelling words, you need to consider also the other valid ways of spelling a word. So using words like gray in your domain name could be spelled GREY or GRAY. Both of them are valid, but you want to avoid words that are like that have two different spellings, even though they sound the same. Another mistake that people make is they come up with these domain names that are just too long. Your domain name does not need to be a sentence. You want to keep it short, you want to keep it simple, and limit it to like maybe 3 or 4 words maximum if you can. And the last mistake that people make is they do not check to make sure that their domain name is not a registered trademark. So this could lead you into all sorts of legal troubles if you are not diligent and check to make sure that what you choose isn't already trademarked. There's a website called uspto.gov. You can go on there and you can search for the words that you want to use in your domain name to see if somebody holds the trademark for them already. So now that you have a list of names that you are thinking about using for your domain name, where should you buy one? Well, I recommend not buying one through your web hosting service. I like to keep both my domain name registrar and my web hosting services separate. So that way, if I ever have an issue, I'm not losing both my domain name and my website at the same time. I like to use cloudflare.com because they don't mark up their domain names. Whatever it costs for them to have a domain name is exactly what they charge you. So if you had a list of like maybe 3 or 4 domain names that you wanted to use and they are still all taken, well, here are some things that you can do that will kind of help you be able to find something that is unique. One is that you can add the industry that your company is in. So if you are a gardening company or a construction company, or maybe you're painters, try adding painters, gardening, construction into the domain name and see if that is available. Another thing you can try doing is adding the location where your business is. But you want to be careful that it is not something that is too narrow, because if in the future your company expands and then reaches out into other areas, then it will no longer make sense to have that location in your domain name. So for instance, if you only plan on servicing the area of Chicago, then you can have Chicago in your domain name. But if in the future you want to expand throughout all of Illinois, then maybe using Chicago is not a good idea, unless you plan on having a different website for each location throughout the state. And lastly, you can use descriptive words like pro, expert, or quality in your domain name, which will help it become unique and also serves another purpose of helping the branding of your company. The bottom line is you really don't want to overthink this because you might wind up getting analysis paralysis. So just make a list of maybe 4 or 5 domain names that you think are good according to the tips that I laid out in this video and put them in and see if they work. I'm sure that you'll have no problem finding one that fits you and your business. And once you have one registered, use the hashtag GiantSlayer and put it in the comments below. And if you're ready to learn more about marketing, check out this video that YouTube thinks you'll enjoy.